Good afternoon, Chairman. We are now live.
Thank you and welcome to today's Lincolnshire Waste Partnership Committee. Straight on with the agenda, so we've got apologies for absence.
We have apologies from Councillor Foster and Councillor Tyrrell.
Thank you. I think Councillor Head is on his way and I think we've got Councillor Evans online as well. And do we have any declarations of interest? Seeing none. So that brings on to the minutes of the meeting held on the 11th of July. We've got a proposer and seconder. Councillor Whittington. Councillor Wright. All those in favour?
We can't vote at the moment, we're not qualified.
Oh, right, okay.
Oh, unless we need to
Is there anyone online who's voting?
we need to know if we're voting.
Okay, just double check. Councillor Evans, are you able to hear the meeting?
Yes, thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Oh, Councillor Bearley.
We need to be able to see them, do you know if they're voting?
Good afternoon. My apologies for being late.
Yep, no problem. Thank you very much. So, is everyone in favour of the minutes? Online? Yep, okay.
They're not indicating, they need to indicate if they're voting.
Councillor Brearley and Councillor Evans, are you in favour of the minutes? I can't see your hand, sorry.
Certainly, Chairman, yes.
Councillor Evans?
Abstain, thank you.
Okay. Right, so they're approved. And that takes on to item number 4, which is the terms of reference by Victoria.
Thanks, Councillor McNally. So, attached in the agenda are the current terms of reference for the Lincolnshire Waste Partnership. These were last reviewed in 2021, and within those terms, they have to be reviewed every 2 years. So it's timely that we have a look at those terms of reference now. They're attached to the report, and there are a couple of amendments within the appendix item. So if anyone's got any changes or anything they'd like to discuss, then please raise those.
Thank you, Victoria. Mark?
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chairman. On page 15 of the appendix, which is the first page of Appendix A, paragraph 2, which gives the list of voting members, there's one omission there, which is the representative of the council leaders on there. It's not on there, and is actually listed as a voting member on the front page of the documents, but that role is not represented in the terms of reference, so I'd like to propose that that's added. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Whittington. Did you want to second that?
No.
I'll speak.
I wanted to, another one I wanted to talk about.
Ah, right, yeah. Go on.
If I can, Chairman, likewise as well, within paragraph 2, where it says one officer from each council outlined below, it should say one officer and the officer representative from the Chief Exec Lead Group.
Thank you. So, are you happy with that, Councillor Whittington?
Yes, I'm happy to amend my amendment to that. That's fine. Yeah.
Yeah. Do I have a seconder for that? Thank you, Councillor.
Thanks for that. So with the clarity coming in the paragraph number 2, the amendment to paragraph 8 to clarify quorum, that's no longer required.
Yeah, I think that's what Councillor Whittington was getting at, yeah. Councillor Head?
Thank you, Chairman. Just looking at paragraph 15, I just wondered whether it says review the terms of reference every 2 years. I just wonder whether we need something in there that allows, if necessary, to do an interim review. Depending on, things might change, but that ties us specifically to 2 years. I just wonder whether members think that there should be a mechanism in there where it could be 2 years or sooner if required.
Yeah, thank you. I don't see a problem with that. I mean, I think when we originally did it, I think it was biannually, and then it changed to 2 yearly. So, but like say, if there's anything that does crop up, then it won't be a bad idea to put it in. Councillor Whittington?
Yeah, I think that makes sense. So if that's a proposal from Councillor Head, I'll be happy to second that. Thank you.
Is there anything you want to add, Victoria? Or?
No, not from me, thank you, unless any other councillors have got anything else to discuss.
Chairman, could I raise an issue, please?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, I'm also on page 15, and section 1 of the terms of reference, and I'm looking at the first line, A, to focus all stakeholders on the delivery of the objectives set out in an agreed joint municipal waste strategy, which is the document that sets out the reasons why refuse and recycling is so important. But as individual councillors and collectively, although with slightly different carbon reduction targets, we all weigh up decisions against the environmental impact. And I just wonder if it would be helpful to clarify in that first point that it's related to carbon reduction. So it was specifically mentioned in the terms of reference. I hope that's helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, Councillor Burt, how would you phrase that in the paper in terms of reference?
I would just probably take some of the wording from the Joint Municipal Waste Strategy, but just to clarify that all decisions are made and considered against the environmental imperative.
Did you want to, Roger?
Yeah, I can take the councillor's point, but he's just referred to the strategy being the overarching document where that's referenced anyway. So I don't actually see the need to then begin to drill down into that document and start referring to specifics. We can take that as a given, that by referring to the strategy, we're also referring to those direct references to what we wish to target within it, such as carbon reduction and reduction in waste and all of the other aspects that we're dealing with. So yeah, I agree with the ambitions within it, and if we begin to add to what we've got there, then we begin to build up the terms of reference, which is a repetitive and reflecting other documents that we've already got. So I think we're already saying it, in other words.
Yeah, thank you. And I think Matthew's going to bring up the carbon plan from the joint strategy anyway later on. Anything else, Victoria? No. So that brings on to the next, if everyone's happy with that.
Need to vote on it.
Do we, just for clarity, we need to vote on that item and the amendments. So it was proposed by Councillor Whittington, seconded by Councillor Gamber-Jones. All those in favour, and all those online, if you could
Put the face on screen.
put your face on the screen, please.
Where's Councillor Evans?
That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Councillor Evans 6, and Owen. Yeah, that's unanimous. So that takes on to the next item, which is the twin stream rollout update. Rachel?
Thank you. Yeah, just a paper here to give an update on the activities of the twin stream initiative, so the separated paper and card and the improvements to the mixed dry recycling. Originally agreed that we'd run a trial back in, can't believe now, 2019, and has since now been implemented in 4 of the districts. So Boston commenced April 21, North Kesteven October 21, West Lindsey April 22 and East Lindsey in October 22. So 4 of those authorities of the 7 collection authorities now collecting paper and cards separately. It's been supported by the performance and improvement team who are working both with residents, with the teams in each authority to engage with members of the public and support them. So that continues to be successful. And along with that has been a robust form of communications campaign under Right Thing, Right Bin, which we've also been using with the authorities not yet rolled out in the twin stream in order to educate the public and start to see some improvements before we've done the roll-in in all of the waste collection authorities. To date then, since the inception of the separate collections, we've collected over 12,800 tonnes of separated paper and card, which is going still to Palm Paper at Kings Lynn. I think some of the members now in the room have been on a site visit as well since we last met, and they're still reporting that Lincolnshire County Council's materials are the highest local authority material that is presented to them in the country, which is really good to hear. In terms then of the mixed dry recycling, and I know in Matthew's paper later in the agenda he'll concentrate in a bit more depth on some of the performance metrics, but for those authorities who have now rolled in, pre-implementation the average contamination rate in the mixed dry recycling was in excess of 31% on average. At the end of quarter 3 for 2022, you'll see in the paper that the 3 authorities that had a full quarters metric at the end of that were reporting 16.7% in Boston, 14.98 and 14% contamination. So it's a significant improvement in the quality of material collected. In addition to that work that we've been doing directly with residents, we've also been delivering an engagement programme with schools and community groups. A lot of work's been done now with schools. Over 250 schools in the county have had direct contact from us. 21 schools within the current year have received direct engagement sessions from the team. I mean, over 500 primary school children have taken part. The demand for that is growing week on week. And this week alone, we've had 3 schools visited and delivered to 30 pupils at a time. We've got on average 3 schools a week booked in, and other community groups now, so things like parish groups, residents associations, WIs, etc. So there's a massive pull on that, which is really, really good and very well received. So in terms of going forward then, for the rest of the current financial year, we'll be sustaining the programme of improvement in the 4 WCAs that have already rolled in. So revisiting some of those harder areas, making sure that we're engaging, especially where there's transients or there's a slippage in terms of quality, and supporting the WCAs to embed this and continue to improve. And then be looking at how we'll continue the programme thereafter. So the recommendation here is that the partnership note and continue to support the implementation and the progress that's made to date.
Thank you, Rachel. Has anyone got any questions? Councillor Bailey.
Thank you, Chairman. It's not a question, but it's just to recognise what the figures say. The figures speak for themselves. This was absolutely the right thing to do, and it's continuing to pay dividends. Initially, some people had concerns around basics such as where they would put an additional bin, and also inevitably there were one or two people that had their bins left because of contamination. But the tremendous improvement throughout the whole collection regime now, not only the quality of the paper and card that we're collecting, but also the improvement in the mixed dry recycling. I think it shows the level of understanding of the need and the support amongst most residents. Inevitably, there will be areas that are probably still challenging. I very much welcome the ongoing work to reduce contamination rates, but really I just wanted to take the opportunity again to say a huge thank you to Rachel and her team for all the work that they've done on this, and long may it continue. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bailey. Councillor Head.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Really, in the same vein as Councillor Braley, I think it's a testament to the work and effort that's gone in from Rachel and her team, and it shows what we can do when we work together as a partnership. This has been a real success, and it also feeds into other aspects of our respective councils' climate action plans. So this has been a really, really good 2 years. And thanks for Boston for going first. We learned an awful lot from the problems that you had in Boston. That's translated through, and each authority that's followed on from that, we've all benefit from shared learning. So this is a really, really good exercise and shows what we can do if we do work together as a partnership. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Head. Councillor Wright.
Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to add, I think, for those that have been around long enough, the years that we struggled with how to get contamination rates down and all the Super 6 and all the rest of it we were looking at, and we didn't really, I mean, there was some successes, but not a massive impact. So I don't think it should be, you know, we should be celebrated and not underestimated the phenomenal sort of effects that it's had now on contamination rates across the piece by doing the twin stream. I mean, it's both effective in that we're supplying a very good product to Palm Paper, which I saw when I was there. But the fact is that it's had that knock-on across the piece, and residents in those areas are understanding the process that much easier now. So I think that should, you know, we should make note of that, because in one foul swoop, you know, making one change has made a massive difference to where we were previously for many years.
Thank you, Councillor Wright. Anyone else? Just in terms of the contamination, obviously they check the, you know, different bin rounds all the time. So the ones that show up with the sort of, you know, there's a problem area type thing or a problem round, what sort of interventions would happen then?
So as part of the programme, we've actually also established our own sampling station, so we're able to identify where the specific rounds are, where we have got specific issues, and we can tell the areas we will design the right intervention. So, for example, recently in West Lindsey, we'd identified some new builds where perhaps they hadn't had quite the right messaging, and we've been out, we've door knocked, we've spoken with residents, we've worked alongside the crews so that we re-educate, in the same vein as potentially in some of the inner towns where we find there's an issue with fast food, takeaway, pizza boxes, etc. We can do direct communications in real time, do some door knocking, go out, the staff will go out and support the collection crews and make sure they've got all the information they need, and we target those specifically then, and we're able to identify the improvement. Yeah,
Thank you, Rachel. You got any comments, Victor? I know it's just been rolled out in East Lindsey. You got any comments about? I know it's, from my own personal experience, it was a bit same as everywhere else. It was up in the air to start with, but actually it seems to have settled down, and everyone's quite accepted it, and you know, everyone's quite grateful of the glass being put in the grey bins now. But I don't know if you've got any other comments.
Yeah, I think just to echo what some of the other councillors have been saying, really, that it's been a real move forward in terms of how we deliver clean recycling, I think, across the county. And I think interesting point for me is how much more recyclate we capture from our residual bins. So not only cleaning up recycling, but actually moving it from otherwise what would have been thrown away, gone to energy from waste, actually coming into recycling. So I think all those are really positive messages moving forward. And I think the other key point that it has shown is that we need to keep that engagement with our residents. And it's really key in you know, helping residents understand what we're trying to do, but also the crews are working really hard, and it's not an easy task. And often, you know, they'll get a bit of feedback, if you like. So it's providing them with that level of support, and they will hand out leaflets and they will speak to residents. But it's been a huge effort for everybody involved. But it's really great to see the positive, you know, what's in Rachel's report, the positive reduction in the amount of recyclate that we can't recycle in that bin.
Thank you, Victoria. Anyone else? Anyone online? Mark, Councillor Whittington.
Yeah, thanks, Chairman. I'm noticing that in terms of these street bins, obviously the contamination rates are higher. I'm assuming, and maybe incorrect, that is that due to fast food waste that people are just putting in the wrong bin? Because obviously the numbers are quite higher, and I know we've had the conversation that most people, when they're at home, seems to be putting food, you know, food wrappers, pizza boxes, and whatever in the right bins. But I'm guessing that those numbers on street bins probably due because people are less likely to do it, or being to say perhaps they've had a bit too much to drink, so they don't really care which bin they put it into.
Do you want to cover that one, Rachel?
Yeah, I think in terms of the data that we hold, these are from householder curbside bins as opposed to litter bins at the moment. We haven't, the litter bins are collected separately and not part of the round, so they're not included in this data.
Thank you, Rachel. Any other comments? Online? Nothing. That takes us to the next item then. I think everyone's quite happy with the way that rollout's going and everything at the minute. Next one's on to the Joint Municipal Waste Strategy Review. Steve?
Thank you, Chair. And it comes hot on the heels of the previous item, which of course is underpinned by the Joint Municipal Waste Management Strategy adopted by the Lincolnshire Waste Partnership in 2019 after a full debate, some focus workshops, some people will remember, and of course a public consultation exercise. The waste strategy adopted a vision, a clear vision, supported by 10 objectives, and put in place the principles of an action plan in order to deliver those objectives. It also said that it would be reviewed after 5 years, and the Strategic Waste Officer Group have identified that 5 years will be up next year, and so it has started some work to review what was in the existing Joint Waste Management Strategy. And it's doing that in the context, of course, that we've got the Resources and Waste Strategy 2018, which is where the full effects of that are yet still to be felt, and the Environment Act, which we're all very much aware of from 2021. And of course, there's a lot of actions there that are feeding through. So we're aware that it's a changing environment. Despite all of that, you'll be pleased, I hope, or members will be pleased to know that the Officer Group considered that the vision stated in the strategy still remains robust, and that the objectives, by and large, remain entirely appropriate, just with some minor adjustments that are required, and those are set out in the report. We're also suggesting that it's perhaps timely that we review the format of the action plan to make it as flexible as possible to meet the requirements coming over the hill, and that we look at the performance indicators so that we can not only make sure that we're presenting those clearly to members, but also that we can be flexible about how and what we present in response to that changing environment. So our recommendations are that, that the partnership supports the minor adjustments and agrees to a review of the action plan, and that it asks the Strategic Officer Group to look at the performance indicators and then bring that back as a formal report to the next meeting. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Steve. Any comments, questions? Councillor Wright?
Thank you, Chairman. Can I just ask, Steve, with regards to Objective 3, with regards to food waste, where it's consideration with regards to TEEP. TEEP, as I know, I think was strengthened over the years to stand up to legal scrutiny, especially from European court system. Are they proposing to keep TEEP as it is, or will there be a new standard?
I don't know if other officer colleagues will differ. I think it's part of the things that we're still emerging. At the moment, the information seems to be that it will be basically the same, but I think I'm looking at Charlotte, that they've said they would keep it basically the same, but that they could reserve the right to make some changes later on based on learning. So we're working on that basis at the moment.
Charlotte?
Yeah, so they are absolutely working on a similar principle, and what I've seen so far is they're working on like an online format to do that. So you'll go through standard processes. So it'll be a standard. TEEP in the past has been very much based on how people go through that process. They want to standardise it, and then at the end of it, you'll get something that kind of talks about how TEEP-proof you are. So yeah, they are still working on that.
Yeah, so seeing no one else, does that one be proposed? Pardon? Yeah, Councillor Wright. Second by
I'm
Councillor.
happy to second, Chairman.
Pardon?
I was going to second it, Chairman, but I do support the proposals.
Yeah, thank you. All those in favour? Yeah, that's unanimous again. So that takes on to the partner updates. I mean, we've all got them for noting. Is there anything anyone sort of wants to highlight a little bit? I mean, there was one thing I think I was quite interested in, the battery vehicles, if anyone wants to pick up on that. It seemed quite a low mileage range, really. I'm not 100% sure, but...
Yes, Chairman, I can help with that. I think you're quite right. That was the purpose of the update, to provide an update to this group. Yeah, North Kesteven were lucky enough to be hosting one of these vehicles a couple of times last year. One of them was an open event for neighbouring authorities to come along and have a look at the vehicles, to try them out. The second opportunity was to try the vehicle in anger, so to speak, and put it in a real world situation. So the report there gives you a good idea about what it looks like. Very important, because most of us are rural or semi-rural authorities, so we get an idea about what to expect if looking at one of these e-collect vehicles. By and large, they look the same as any other collection vehicle that you might see, but certainly the experience in the cab and the way that it works, there's some slight differences there. We've moved on from there. We have started to procure some electric vehicles, but not the full size wagons, like some of our other partners as well, just some smaller vehicles. So I think at the moment it's probably a case of testing things out, seeing what works, seeing how we move on from here, and most importantly, looking at what technologies emerging as well.
Thank you, David. I mean, I'm not 100% sure, but do they do hydrogen vehicles or not?
Well, I could probably come in on there. Yeah, it's a developing technology all the time. It's certainly one that we're keeping a close eye on, as I'm sure everybody else is as well.
So that brings on to the next item, which is the health and safety update. Oh, sorry, Councillor Whittington.
Yeah, thanks.
Apologies.
Just a quick question, Mr. Chairman, around the electric vehicle. It says the vehicle's regulated at a top speed of 36 miles an hour. What's the sort of top speed of a traditionally powered freighter? Because I'm just thinking from the perspective of South Kesteven, a lot of our freighters access the south of our district by going down the A1, and I'm not entirely sure of a fleet of vehicles doing 36 down the A1 may cause a few issues. I'm just wondering about that. And just in terms of the length of the runs they've done and the charge that's still left in, were those able to do complete full rounds? But more importantly, what was the distance from the depot to when they started the run? Because obviously, again, South Kesteven, with our depots in Grantham, potentially, if we have electric vehicles, by the time they've reached the far-flung reaches of our district, they may literally have no charge left in them, or very little to then do the run and get back. Thanks.
Yeah, through you, Chairman. That was part of the reason putting the top speed there within the comments. I know that we don't have the A1, but we do have the A15, the A17, and yeah, that was one of the concerns about exactly how quickly you could sort of get from A to B on some of those roads. In terms of the range, yes, range anxiety is an issue. I think it's dependent on what you use the vehicle for. And so what we wanted to do is to try it with a different range of loads. So obviously paper and card is much different to filling it up full of garden waste. So if you were to do the latter, then it could potentially be that range anxiety is an issue. But then one of the things that you probably need to do is to look at your routes and exactly tip times and what happens that way. But you're quite right to point it out that it's got to be a consideration.
Just as a follow-up, so potentially, obviously the technology is changing all the time and advancing all the time. So presumably at some point in the future there'll be other trials of improved vehicles that possibly we could learn something from. So we could just monitor the improvement in technology over time.
Yeah, I'm sure that we can provide further updates to LWP in due course.
Councillor Wright.
Yeah, can I just make the point, Chairman, and especially anybody listening to this, that to make sure it doesn't appear that we're all shooting in the dark, just trying to find out what the range is and trying to get around the respective parts of Lincolnshire. I mean, I don't know whether Charlotte wants to say anything, but I was at the DCN conference recently, and we were also, I would say, haranguing LGA members with regards to them coming late to the party, with the fact that this is everybody nationally struggling with it. It's not just here, and it's not, we want to make sure that I think we're using the national organisations to get us this information, because everybody is trying to do the same thing. Everybody's asking the same questions about range on vehicles, whether it's going to be hydrogen, whether it's going to be battery. And I think we should be concerned. I nearly said that we're in a shocking situation, but obviously that would be too. That we're in a situation where we've got something that is always imminent. It's been imminent now for a while, and it will suddenly land on us, because they will suddenly launch the Environment Act secondary legislation parts on us that will leave us short, even though representation is being made to government and DEFRA all the time with regards to you really don't understand what this means for local authorities. But the fact is, we need to be going with a joint approach nationally, because there's going to be a huge great queue for vehicles, there's going to be a huge great debate about which vehicles are right for where you are, and I don't think that just on a local level, and with total respect to everybody's involved in it on a local level, but I don't think it's going to be resolved on a local level. What's the idea vehicle approach to be taken on this? Because we are, frankly, just going to be dropped in it by government if we don't watch what we're doing.
Thank you, Councillor Wright. Anyone else? That takes us on to the regulatory updates, which the first one is the Environment Act 2021. But before I go there, I apologise for being rude at the start, and I do welcome Karen, which is the Chief Exec's representative to the meeting. So, whenever you're ready, Charlotte.
Thank you. There's a presentation for me to talk through if the technology works for us all. Brilliant, thank you. Yes, so the aim of today is for me to give you an update on the Environment Act as we know it at the moment. So if we can move on to the next slide. I'll be trying to talk about kind of what we know and actually what we're still waiting for. But I'll be talking about the Environment Act as it relates to waste. The Environment Act is quite a big act, but in particular we're looking at the commitments that were made in the 2018 Resources and Waste Strategy, and that's shown in the Act at Part 3. And as part of the waste and resource efficiency part, it came with a number of consultations, the latest being released in 2021, and they relate to extended producer responsibility, deposit return schemes, and the consistency in household and business recycling. We have received the responses for the first two. We don't currently have the final response, although in a meeting yesterday we were kind of led to believe that it could be within this month that we might receive that, but we have heard that before, so we shall wait and see. So on to the next slide. So I'll take each of the sections kind of one by one. So in terms of extended producer responsibility, what we do know is that we've been told that this will be new money for local authorities, but that is until the next spending review, so there's a huge caveat in that sense, and that we are expecting the money in 2024, but also that will not be an actual, that will be modelled, and authorities will be grouped and benchmarked to get that baseline and for potential payments. Those potential payments are then further caveated by the quality, efficiency and effectiveness in terms of what are expected and necessary costs, and that's how we'll be calculated to receive those payments from producers. The whole premise of extended producer responsibility is to ensure that through the packaging that's placed on the market, that then becomes paid for by the producers for the collection and disposal of it. And the money that I was talking about is that money that's coming from producers. Any income that is received for those materials, though, will be reduced from those calculations in terms of what will be received, and payments will come to each authority. So payments will be coming to WCAs and WDAs separately, depending on those calculations made. For anybody who isn't deemed as being or delivering an efficient and effective service, there will be deductions made, but those won't be immediate. They will be after an improvement plan, so there'll be an opportunity to try and achieve what that efficient and effective service is. What we don't know is what that means. What does efficient and effective mean? How will those calculations be made? In 2025 as well, the fees will change and they'll be modulated. So anything that is deemed as less recyclable will cost more to the producers and therefore paid to us. And that a scheme administrator will be created, and that body will be receiving the money from the producers, figuring out who gets what, and then paying it to each of those authorities. And that the scheme administrator will not be covering business waste at this point in at time. And the other thing we know is that we will need more data, definitely need more data, and we need to understand our data. In terms of what we don't know, and these are really, really key parts, is kind of how those groupings will be made, what's going to be included, how we're going to be benchmarked, and as I said, what does efficient and effective mean? And also about how the types of collections that we have, how they're going to impact EPR and the groupings and the allocations that we'll get. And that will potentially impact the local choices that each council across the country makes in how they make their collections. There's going to need to be a lot of sampling done to understand of the waste that we collect, how much of that is packaging, and then getting the money back. And at the moment, we don't know how that's going to need to be done. And in our instance, what we really don't know is how this is going to work properly in two-tier authorities, and DEFRA are still working through that. So that's it for onto DRS, please. So we know that from 2025, it will be all in, which means any drinks, single-use drinks container from 50 millilitres to 3 litres, and that's including those in multi-packs, and it includes steel, aluminium cans, and plastic bottles, but not glass. The government are looking at this system, so this will be a brand new system outside of our collection system, and they're looking to achieve a 90% collection target for drinks containers within the first 3 years of DRS coming in. This does mean that will be lost from our collection and disposal systems, and potential impact that could have to each of us. Anything that's in that's DRS is not then eligible for EPR payments, so this understanding how that's going to work, where there's the potential already for 10% of that to still be in our waste collection systems, and how we can potentially recover that, and if it is a recoverable material by the time it's gone through the system as well. Again, we do need to know our data better, but what we also are waiting for is whether the future will hold a digital DRS. So that would mean that people being able to put their materials in our collection systems, because DRS will be people having to take these drinks bottles and put them either in a reverse vending machine or back to a host point. So it will be no longer going in your household waste, but the future might be a digital DRS which would put that waste back into our collection systems that we would have had to have changed. So there's the potential risk of kind of having to jump backwards and forwards and confusing the public if that happens. And we still don't know what the deposit levels will be either. So if we move on to consistent collections, and as I talked about earlier, unfortunately, we don't know a great deal. So as you can see on this slide, there's a lot of question marks, and that is because we still are awaiting the response. But the very key things that we do know is that the Environment Act states separate collections for those materials, including food waste. What we don't know is whether or not free garden waste proposals will remain. There are rumours that it's gone, but I fear personally, if it does go, that actually what it will be replaced with is a cap on the amount that we can charge for garden waste, and the risk around that not kind of taking in those local concerns, as I talked about earlier with EPR, and understanding why costs are different in different areas. And we don't understand properly how this will link with EPR and those efficient and effective processes that mean you can potentially get some income there. What does that mean for our collection systems in terms of consistency? And then food waste. So food waste, I've given a whole new slide for itself, because it does have, if we can move on to that one please, it does have much far-reaching issues for us. So we know that the Environment Act states separate weekly collections of food waste. We know that flats will be included from day one, and we know that the government have put £295 million of capital aside, and these are only for vehicles and receptacles. But we also know that it won't cover anybody who's adopted early. So in SK's case, obviously they're not there now, but if they had continued, anything that you've already paid for, they won't be backdating in terms of capital. But for ongoing revenue, that will be should be covered. But what we do know is that actually all of our expenditure will not be covered. Again, it's not going to be based on actuals, and the expenditure will be based on commonalities and modelled values again. We also know that it won't include any additional infrastructure needs, so for example depots, so there's no money set aside for that. And we're under the impression as well that at the end of this year we will receive a letter that will advise us of that 295 million, how much has been allocated to us for our amount towards those vehicles and receptacles. We do know that there'll be new burdens they've been committed to, but the funding formula is yet to be agreed, so we don't know what the revenue that we will get for food waste collections are. And we do know that there's a transition process going to to be put in place. I think they're going to phase this, but we believe that we'll probably be in phase 1. In terms of what we don't know is when any of this is coming. The last date that we've seen is March 25, and what the consultation response will give us is hopefully some clarity on those timelines. And in terms of kind of who's going to be in that first phase, what the potential for bottlenecks are, the transitional arrangements, who's in and who's out for those, we don't know, but we're going to work on the basis of us being in that first phase. But DEFRA have identified that there is the potential for bottlenecks, which is why they're looking to get the £295 million allocations out by the end of this year. And as I've said, we just don't know what that new burdens formula is going to cover, other than to say that it won't cover everything. Next slide, please. So in terms of what it means for us, controversially, DRS is probably the clearest response that we've had, and probably the easiest one for us to kind of work on in terms of the impact to us. If we can start to understand what's in our waste and what potentially then we will lose, we can start to work on that. But it does mean that we will be losing from our collection systems and from our disposal process as well, which will have impact on contracts. Also, there's going to be a big impact to our businesses and our consumers, but there is the potential it will reduce litter, which is really good. And hopefully DRS is going to be one of the more, in each area, easier to understand in terms of, as a consumer, the difficulty comes that actually it's going to be different in England as it is to Scotland, as it is to Wales. So there is some issues around that. For EPR, again, there's just so much that we don't know, and in particular about efficient and effective and our groupings, and what it's going to mean for us as our partnership as a two-tier authority, and whether or not it will actually achieve what we want it to in terms of circular economy and improving recyclability and actual recycling rates as well. I don't want to labour the point on consistency, but it's without that response, it's really difficult for us to kind of progress too far. But we're working on assumptions of the stuff that we do know in the conversations that we still continue to have with DEFRA, and they are doing quite a lot of engagement sessions and trying to share as much information as they've got. So we will continue to engage with those and work on what we do know and what we can start to gather from what we're hearing. And then final slide is kind of what's next. And as I said, potentially, fingers crossed, we get the response in the next few weeks and we can go from there, and that response will give us some statutory guidance as a consultation alongside it, at last rumour anyway, and potentially a short-term consultation to give us that information. And from there we can really start to hopefully plan what's coming through that guidance. There's more statutory instruments to be laid in terms of EPR, and there's a lot of work going on with DEFRA and the producers. And we are quite lucky that we do have regular conversations with DEFRA about what's going on. So we'll continue to have those. But what we really want to do is make sure that we are part of a whole system approach for this, because yes, it's impacting us as local authorities, but if we can be involved in those conversations with the producers through to the reprocessors, I think we can help to try and make this as good as an option as it can possibly be for us. And I can take any questions.
Do we have any questions? Thank you, Charlotte, for that. I mean, it's interesting that actually, by the sounds of it, we might end up not actually picking any recycling up because it might be done for us. Is the 295 million, is that for Lincolnshire alone, or is that countrywide?
No, that's the whole. That's
a bit of a dream.
Yeah.
Councillor Whittington.
Yeah, I mean, on that one, I just had a quick Google. There's 333 local authorities, obviously of varying sizes. So if it's and of course it won't be an equal allocation. So I'm reckoning for a district council, we're probably lucky if we get £250,000 each, which quite frankly is laughable, because there's no way you'd be able to, get the vehicles you need for that sort of money. It's ultimately the amount of money that's been put in place by the government to cover food waste is, I think, is ridiculously low. It needs to be 3 or 4 times that at least, probably even more than that. But yeah, and that's my big fear with all of this stuff from the Environment Act. We're going to be asked to do more and more and more and more. They talk about making new burdens for funding available, and potentially, yes, we might get some, but then there's no clarity about whether or not we'll keep that in the new funding, in any future funding settlement. I just, you know, this potentially, as, with all the other cost pressures councils are facing, there's been an awful lot of councils across the country putting in Section 114 notices.
Councillor Whittington, Charlotte, did you want to come back?
Yeah, just on that point, I appreciate the very kind of rough calculations, but just one key part of this is that anybody who already has bought food waste vehicles won't be included in that 295. So there's quite a few people that have already progressed and done that. So there is maybe a little bit of a hope that actually that money will be a little bit more than your original calculations, because there are some that have already done it. So just to ease concerns mildly, maybe.
Time for everyone to start praying. Councillor Head.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Thank you for that update, Charlotte. I think the big issue for me is, and George Orwell could equally have written, all waste collection authorities are equal, but some are more equal than others. The thing that worries me with this is where the benchmark is set. And I think looking all the way through this, it seems to be somewhat of a fudge from DEFRA. It just seems, it just trundles on. There's a lot of unknowns here. We know that we don't know what we don't know. And it just concerns me, as Councillor Whittington said, that we, as local government, local councils, we're going to pick up a large part of the tab for this, because I don't think things have been considered in the right way. One thing I did wonder, and this is a bit probably left field, if you like, in terms of food waste collection, because of the limited amount of material that's going to be collected and the number of vehicles that could potentially be required. I just float the idea that it may be something we could look at as a partnership, so that in effect you treat food waste collection as you would do if you were a unitary authority, as just one collection authority, rather than as 7 different ones, because there may be areas of overlap and the rounds could be up. I've got no idea whether that's a possibility or not, but if it saves money and achieves the same end for all of us, is that something that we could look at, whether there's a possibility of really working together on this to limit our exposure?
I think we've talked in the past, haven't we, about the concerns of actually how economical is it and environmental is it for us to go and collect food waste. But I think what DEFRA have been challenged quite hard on that, so what they'll be providing is their impact assessment to make sure that balance is correct, that actually we're not going and kind of collecting something that it's going to have a negative environmental impact. In terms of crossovers, I think there's work been done in the past about the opportunity to share this. I talk quite a lot with DEFRA and kind of say that actually a really good working food waste collection almost does itself out of business, because the idea is to reduce the amount of food waste that's produced in the first place. So we should need less and less in the future. So I think as that potentially starts to kind of see itself into fruition, we might see some changes on where they are. But their environmental improvement plan, they have set some very clear targets on reducing the amount of food waste that there is out there. So I think that's the biggest driver for them on this. And us as a partnership, we'll need to keep an eye on how much food, because at this point, we don't really know how much food waste is going to be presented. We've got the data from where SK were, we've got models that are out there, but we're really going to have to try and understand what that pie of food is going to be for us to collect, and how we can efficiently collect that individually and therefore as a partnership as well.
Could I just ask one question? Do you happen to know what basis DEFRA have made their separate food waste collection on? What was their assumption? Was their assumption that food waste was going to landfill? Or because not all food waste goes to landfill, not all food waste goes to energy from waste. some goes to anaerobic digestion, depending on which part of the country you're in. I just wondered what their baseline was and how they've come to justify what we are going to be asked to do in sort of 3 years' time.
Yeah, absolutely. They've been challenged really hard on that. And actually one of the things that, and we had a meeting with them recently, one of the things they've understood through this process is about the kind of transition of food waste out of areas like EFWs and the impact that has both contractually, but also to the mix and the working of those systems. So I think the impact assessment will have done an assessment based on kind of the areas they think that places have gone. They're having to review that impact assessment. So when consistency comes out, it will come hopefully with a new revised impact assessment that will have more clarity on kind of those assumptions. But I think they've done as well as they can in assuming where things go. But I think the biggest driver is to take food waste out of landfill and EFWs and put it into anaerobic digesters, because it's that removal of the methane, it's that creation of a new useful resource, because the Environment Act is about the resources and waste, isn't it? And it's creating that waste and making it a resource. And whilst EFW is a form of making it a resource, I do think anaerobic digestion does potentially provide it as a better resource. And it's about, we're going to create this waste, let's do the best thing we can with it at the end.
Thank you. Councillor Wright.
Thank you, Chairman. I do like an optimist, Charlotte, with regards to financing. But it's on that question. I mean, this morning I was in a migration board meeting and we were berating the ministry for the fact that it's got various different schemes and they never look at them all together to actually have a coherent pattern, and we pick up all the burden. This time I get the feeling that they are looking at them all together, but it's not being said, is it? What my fear is not just about the food waste and the cost, but linking that to EPR. They've probably done the calculations by now by roughly how much they think that we will be able to benefit from EPR. But my point on that is that over the past, we've had a general reduction in packaging, but that was more because it was, shall we say, more fashionable, and there was being seen to do it, and it benefited firms to do that. But this is going to be the biggest driver yet, isn't it, for them to actually reduce that packaging right down, which means that actually what we'll take will be massively reduced. We won't see the income from it that's been projected, and therefore we're going to be short across the board, aren't we? And that's what I'm really, fear. I mean, yes, it's good for overall to reduce waste, but at the same time, we shouldn't still be left with the cost as if the waste was higher.
Can I just agree? So I think at last count they assumed about 1.5 billion for EPR in terms of what it's going to be, because they had to take business out. So it was 2.5, I think, until they did that. So yeah, they have got some rough ideas, and those calculations are continuing with them, and they'll have to understand what that looks like as they modulate it. But you're right, and my point, I think it was my last point as well, about whole system approach is absolutely key, because EPR, in the conversations we're having, we finally got everybody around the table. So you've got the producers, you've got us, and you've got the reprocessors. And if all those parts aren't talking, then the producers make a decision to change the type of material that they produce, and then the processors can't deal with that, and we're just left carrying around waste that nobody really wants. So I think, and I'm not normally the optimist if you ask anybody, but I do think in those optimistic conversations that we're having, actually getting all those people in the room to start thinking about what it looks like from its production to its end. The producers, as being responsible now for having to pay for the material that are put on the market, are now very much saying, well, I want that material back. So they're invested in this system to say, I want to see it come back, and I want it in a good state as well, which is where effective and efficient will come in to make sure that the systems in between, are getting that material in as good a state as it can be back to them, so that they can recycle it. And it's twofold. It is the cost to their bottom line, but it's also the drive from residents and consumers to see that packaging is more recyclable, and that, I think that will only continue. And your concern is completely fair. If we get left out of those conversations, then we get stuck travelling around waste that we shouldn't need to. But hopefully we can be involved now.
Yeah, thanks for that. Can I come back as well? Is there any conversations going on with regards to recycling? And I've a specific one, because I'm thinking about transportation and the whole process and what actually happens. Now, I will name and shame, but I believe it's Coca-Cola that will have plastic bottles, they'll be taken to a recycling plant, which basically means they're shredded. So they take that good plastic bottle and it's shredded down, and then it's taken to a plant where it's recycled, as in reformed into another plastic bottle, but obviously with some new plastic, because no plastic is 100% recyclable and deliverable as a product. So there has to be new introduced. So instead of the good old-fashioned way of steam cleaning, and actually setting up a plant that basically just whacks them through a high-pressure steam cleaner, brings them out clinically clean, sterilised. Instead, they're shredding, so we're transporting, they're shredding, they're transported, they're reformed, they're transported back out again. Surely we need to be having that conversation that says that that kind of practice needs to change if we're talking about meaningful recycling, because that's appalling.
So I think that's almost what DRS is trying to achieve by having smaller collections, because if you think about, by the time we collect it, take it to the transfer station, it then goes on to the MRF to be collected, it is effectively shredded anyway, and they're not particularly reusable. So unless you've got a DRS system or an old school when you took your glass bottle back and gave it to them and they steam cleaned it, I don't think the same process could exist with the mass production, and that's the biggest change that we've got now. There's just a mass production of waste, and I think what EPR is also trying to do is not just make them more recyclable, but potentially make people think, do I need this packaging altogether, and reduce, and it's about that waste minimisation as well. So I think it would be great if we had lots of small areas that you could just take stuff in like that, but in a process that we have currently where we collect, you put it in your bin, we collect it, we transport it all around, there's no way that could potentially be reused at this point. But there are definitely conversations about what should packaging look like, how much should we have, and as I say, that's not just being driven by the money that it's going to cost them, but about us all as consumers starting to think about what is it we're taking in terms of resource just to have these additional bits of packaging.
Thank you, Councillor Gamble-Jones. I know there'll be some optimistic comments from yourself.
Not a chance. I mean, just on that point about the plastics, thinking about that one, we've already got the rising debate about not using plastics for it to be in contact with food, because of the rising concern about microplastics migrating into our food, and they're now very concerned about microplastics becoming present almost from birth. They're now able to witness that just by their very presence of being in contact with our foodstuffs and transferring from the containers, even what we considered to be food safe containers, they're now able to transfer from those containers into our foodstuffs over the period. And scientists are now able to identify that inorganic material, namely human tissue, and they're currently not aware what the damage is, but they're now becoming very concerned about the possibility that that is the cause of some long-term chronic diseases. That is still undergoing research, but it is a very good foundation for saying cancel out all plastics in relationship to our foodstuffs. So there's another avenue that we should be thinking about. Rolling back to this whole food waste collection, we're very fortunate in Lincolnshire that we've had a guinea pig funded by the county. Thank you for that. And that's a good start point for us to understand what the actual cost of a high quality food collection is, if it's going to land on all of our doorsteps, and understand from that experience the banana skins that, and I know there were some for that in that first days, they changed the process and understood better how to do it. And the point about doing it together is a good one, but in such a vast county, we may need to do it in hubs rather than trying to do it as one big organisation. And I think Charlotte and I even discussed that at one point, did we not? Of not saying, you know, we're one council and we're another, and reinventing the wheel. So I think we've, as a partnership, we've got to start talking about how that may be something to do now, and ask the officers if they'd like to start working that up for us and see how that could potentially work in reality, about how we could base that in one of our councils to spread out and do that work for us, and what it would like, what it would look like to reduce those costs, because we do need to look at how that may work for a hub servicing one, 2 or 3 other partners in order to reduce those costs. I think that is a very significant concern to all of us. I think that's a very important thing. And just because 3 of us are partners up the East Coast, it shouldn't be something that we should say, well, it must be us 3. It may need us to go west to get the most efficient and effective way of doing things. Go west. Oh yeah, give us a song there, Richard. Go on. So I mean, this is all of this stuff needs to be done working together. You know, I know we talked about joint municipal waste strategies and all that, and then that leads you on to joint municipal waste collection, but that's a whole different ball game. We need to be looking at those options for all of these things that are going to land on our doorsteps, because as we've heard, there's not nearly enough money in the pot to do it for each of us to be doing it 7 times over. So where it works together across borders, we need to be thinking how to do it together, whoever it may work for, in 2s and 3s and 4s if necessary, and that's what we should be thinking of now, before it even arrives, before we understand it fully. I think that's a key part of what this the LWP can do for us as Lincolnshire. So I'd like to propose that as something we begin to think about going forward, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gambler. Did you want to just come back on any of them bits, Charlotte? Or?
Yeah, so as the I'll speak on behalf of the strategic officers. We're happy to have a look at that. What I would just say is that we will be limited to the infrastructure that there is, so potentially rubbing out the borders is an option, but ultimately we need to put that food waste somewhere, which I think is something Mike might be picking up in his infrastructure update anyway. But there's few places that these things will have to go and then be transported to an AD plant, so I don't think there is a kind of silver bullet to this, I suppose. So just to kind of reassure you that we will look, but I'm just not sure that there's anything that's going to save us hundreds of thousands of pounds here.
Thank you. Councillor Whittington?
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chairman. I mean, obviously we were aware that when we went to South Castilian, when we did our food waste pilot, all the waste we collected went up from, it was originally taken to the waste transfer station near Grantham and then taken up to Helmswell Cliff. And I think on average we were doing between 6.5 and 7 tonnes per week into Helmswell Cliff. Well, you roll food waste out across the entire county. Potentially at the moment, I think Helmswell Cliff's the only suitable plant. You could have vehicles going from all over the county into one place. What about the carbon footprint of doing that? You potentially you're saying, we're doing this as part of a campaign for the environment. Well, what we're doing with it, we're sticking it on the back of a lorry, a diesel-powered lorry, and dragging it, in some cases, 40, 50 miles up to north of Lincoln. And I'm guessing you could make the same argument for the energy for waste plant. Stuff's put on a lorry and transported there. So I'm just wondering if those environmental costs of actually physically transporting waste, how that's taken into all of our calculations, because obviously if you disposing of stuff at certain central collection points, you've got to actually get the stuff to that point. and you've got to acknowledge there's going to be an economic and environmental impact of doing that.
Yeah, just to say, yeah, it's very similar about the impact assessments are absolutely key in this to understand the benefits of that. And we'll wait and see what ADEFRAs have for their whole consistency impact assessment, because they are things that we've pushed both in our consistency response, but in ongoing conversations we pushed really hard. You need to make sure that that balance is right before we all are told to go and start running around all over the country. But that's where, and I'll use Roger's phrase about hubs, that's where potentially the waste transfer stations, if they're hubs, then the waste goes there and it goes hopefully up in one, so reducing wherever we can.
Thank you. I don't know if we've got any other. Have we got any online? No. Luckily, Mike's the next one is infrastructure updates, which will just tie in probably quite nicely with the last discussion. Really, I think.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, chomping at the bit. There's quite a few questions that have just come up, which I was looking to kind of respond to anyway. So I'll just start by answering some of those questions. In terms of new burdens funding, the indications are that that will only be available to waste collection authorities and not the waste disposal authorities. And any funding that we have to provide for capital infrastructure changes or ongoing revenue changes should be met theoretically by reduction in disposal costs. That's what DEFRA have indicated so far. So to help your case, then we're slimming down the number of authorities that will be in the pot for the 295 million. It won't be the disposal authorities, unfortunately for us. In terms of a second question from Councillor Head, treating food waste via anaerobic digestion is a more efficient way of disposing of food waste compared to incineration. One thing that it does do is that it moves it within the waste hierarchy. So at the moment, waste that goes through the EFW is classed as recovery. If it becomes, if it goes through an AD plant, that moves it onto recycling. So we will instantly have an improvement in the recycling rate by moving up to 30,000 tonnes of food waste, which, I was just reading yesterday, has created some big improvements in recycling rates around the country. In certain authorities, they've had jumps of over 10%, which is, it's good to know, but it is theoretically, it helps the figures overnight. So, which is, it's good for the long-term objectives. And then just in terms of last question, Councillor Whittington, about the infrastructure and the haulage element, because we are potentially looking at having the material going through the waste transfer stations as it is now, but in a separate mix, a separate collected vehicle, we're then looking to haul that to at least one, hopefully 2 or 3 AD plants somewhere located in the county. So because the amount of material moved on a truck is potentially weighs the same, there shouldn't be a haulage impact to the environment. However, there will be considerable impact from the collection because vehicles will be doing it less efficiently on a weekly basis. So there will be, you're right, there will be an overall kind of impact on the environment, but it's disappointing that it doesn't seem to have been measured so far, or kind of part of the mix, part of the discussion.
But presumably more AD plants mean more capital, so where would the capital come from for those plants?
Yes, so if I just start just talking about what my intentions were, in terms of infrastructure updates, at the moment, I think we are confident that there will be enough AD provision in the county to accept the amount of food waste that we have separately collected. One of our main focuses is to tie down that AD capacity, so we won't have to build a facility ourselves. There is commercial entities out there that will take this material, which is reassuring, but we still have to go through a procurement exercise to tie down that capacity at a time when everyone else is going to be doing the same. So we do have to act with quite a lot of haste and commit to having that capacity when we need it come 2025. So that's one strand that we're looking at. Rachel's team is working with the commercial team to kind of tie down that. We have engaged with the market quite a great deal in the last few months to find out what's out there and just create these kind of communication channels, so we're in a good position when we do start the formal procurement. Coming back from that stage, so that's obviously the final disposal. Coming back to a kind of intermediate position, we are thinking about the waste transfer stations as the drop-off locations from the waste collections. So as you would at this point in time with any of your material, looking to still maintain the same kind of operation whereby it's brought into materials brought into the transfer station and deposited there, where it becomes our responsibility to then haul on to the final AD facility. So at the moment we are looking at what changes we need to make to our 5 waste transfer stations. It will be quite a considerable capital ask, but it's something that we're starting that kind of debate internally about what we will have to do and come up with designs for these changes that we need to make. It's the issue here is the time scale, and I think we had a meeting 2 weeks ago with DEFRA where we agreed that this is a good thing to do. It helps with the objectives of consistency. Food waste can be dealt with better, more efficiently. It's better for the environment. However, the elephant in the room is the timescale that we've been given. And if everybody's doing this for 2025, then that's going to create a hell of a lot of pressure on already stretched budgets. And if we're not careful, because of this competition, we will end up spending more and paying, rather than on a more considered basis and having longer leading times. Essentially, contractors and disposal outlets could be in a very good position because they will be doing a lot of work at the same time, and we could be essentially competing against each other as local authorities because we've got a 2-year timescale. And if we are looking at delivering infrastructure, if the depots need to be expanded from a collection authority priority, if you need to buy depots to have an increased fleet size, do you have the land available and the planning permission, the designs to be able to construct these things? There's a hell of a lot to do within 2 years, and I think we've all got that challenge. So from a collection authority perspective for infrastructure, you'll all be obviously looking at your fleets, but then you've got to look at where the fleets will go. So rationalising depots might be something that collection authorities actually look at. From a disposal perspective, we will be looking at the transfer stations and the suitability and the adequacy of what we've got, and planning on creating these improvements, because food waste is dealt with in a slightly separate way to residual material. It tends to be wetter, it breaks down quicker, it doesn't absorb within other materials where it's collected in a black bin. So we have quite some challenges ahead with from disposal point of view, with the transfer station changes we need to make, which is why we are focusing a lot of time and attention at the moment to planning this out. And obviously we need to keep the discussion going, because the district councils, you district councils, need to know where your drop-off points are going to be. And that's something that we will be just carry on continuing the conversations through the SOWG, because one thing needs to align with the other, and also with the final disposal. So we've got lots of issues to resolve, but that's going to be our main focus in terms of infrastructure. And I'll kind of conclude there, but if there's any questions, then happily kind of have that discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Councillor Wright.
Thank you, Chairman. If I can, Mike, I'm probably going to be a bit geeky about this, but because it suddenly shocked me thinking about the transfer stations for food waste and how they're designed. I suppose if you're going to be food waste, then they're going to need new environmental impact assessments, aren't they? They're going to need odour control systems. They're going to need fixed waste fluid capture systems, aren't they? That's quite a reconstruction, isn't it? And it's not going to come cheap.
Yeah, that's some very good engineering observations. Fortunately, the buildings we've got are quite modern, so we do have odour suppression systems. The issue that we do have is that we don't have an inbuilt drainage system within the sheds. So that is something, because of the requirement to wash down floors and walls where food has been kept, stored, we will have to have separate provision for drainage either within the buildings or outside on a separate footprint, which further creates uncertainty on obtaining planning permission, altering the drainage requirements. We could be essentially digging up the internal floor space of a transfer station, which is very difficult on an operational floor, or doing something external within the footprint of the overall transfer station site. So these are the challenges that we've got to work around, and the disappointing thing is that when we had the discussion with DEFRA, they had no idea of these implications and the deliverability of this. And even the planning permission itself could take 12 to 16 weeks once you've submitted an application to actually get a decision. They don't know the ramifications of what they're requiring us to do, and finding sites, if you have to build a new depot, finding a location, getting the required planning permission, and then doing the design and construction, you'd be looking at over 2 years, up to 3 years. That's a real push. And that's with the certainty. But at the moment, they haven't actually disclosed what the financial penalties will be from 2025. They've stated there will be financial penalties, but they haven't stated at what level they will be. So it's very difficult to build into any kind of business case if you don't know, if you go past that date, what is going to be the punishment if you do go past that date. So it's very difficult, and unfortunately, as you alluded to earlier, the delay in actually coming up with decisions has not delayed the response time, and we're not being given longer. And as I stated earlier, it could actually increase the overall cost because everyone is going to be in a very compressed timescale. And what happens if we don't deliver on this?
Yeah, thank you, Mark. Councillor Whittington.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Thanks, Mike. I mean, my concern is around the capital costs of doing all of this, especially if we're starting to mess up, having to play around with waste transfer stations. I mean, at the moment, certainly the county council and quite a few district councils are slowing down their capital programmes at the moment because of the increase in interest rates and the impact that that's having on a whole variety of things, including MRP, which is then charged into the revenue baseline. There's also the change to the SIP for financial guidance, which is encouraging more and more councils to use internal borrowing to fund capital programmes. To be quite honest, I just find it extremely difficult to find out where this capital money is going to come from local authorities, because interest rates are against us, the new financial regulations are against us. Councils are having to slow down capital programmes because of the current financial situation. And if DEFRA aren't taking account of those three things, well, quite honestly, they're on a different planet to the rest of us. Because ultimately you can have a great business plan, you can have all the planning permissions, everything in place. If you haven't got the money, it's not going to happen.
Thank you, Mark. Did you want to pick up on anything? Or?
Just to say, I agree. Yes, completely.
Councillor Head.
Yeah, just coming off the back of that, is there any possibility that DEFRA could be persuaded to phase this introduction? Because obviously, if you've got a deadline, we'll say the 31st of August 2025, that's where the guillotine comes down, and you've got 300 odd authorities across the country all scrabbling for vehicles, all scrabbling for processing capacity, trying to get buildings built and all the infrastructure and the capital equipment that needs to go into that. Is there any possibility that they could be persuaded to phase it in the same way that we phased the introduction of twin stream? That it then makes it less onerous in terms of supply, may make it slightly cheaper, because if we're all fighting for the same vehicles, I mean, suppliers have got a field day because they can just charge what they like, and we've got no option. We need to meet a deadline. So is that something that the government could be persuaded to actually phase this?
Did you want to pick up on this, Charlotte?
Yeah. The suggestion is that they are looking at phases. So one particular phase at the moment is called transitional arrangements. So they're looking at that. So there are phases being considered, but there's certain criteria to be able to be included in that phase. And in the conversation that we had, unless Mike's going to disagree, it would seem that we won't reach that sort of threshold to be in that transitional phase outside of phase 1. So we're working on the assumption we'll be in phase 1. But as I said earlier, the biggest key to this is that consistency response that theoretically is due in the next few weeks. That will give us that new timescale, because at the moment it's March 2025, but everybody's saying the same thing about bottlenecks, time, requirements. It could be that that will come out and say, actually, for those who can, it's 2025, but for those who have any other requirements, it might be till 2026. We just don't know, and at the moment we're just kind of shooting in the dark as options. So we're working on worst case scenario being March 2025, but my optimistic side is going to come out again that there's going to be a bit more sort of leniency on that, because they do, especially the vehicle purchasing, they've got a really big transition plan for it, and they're talking to the manufacturers about those. And I think there's only like 5 people that make the caddies in the UK, and they're talking to those about can you kind of provide those in that time. So yes, they are, and we are talking to them. So we will continue to bang that drum once we get a bit more information.
Thank you. Mike, did you want to come in as well?
Yeah, just to agree with what Charlotte's just said, and just add one thing further about this transitional arrangement, where they've stated that they will be possibly allowing a 15-year extension, that's 15 years, to bring this in, is where there are major contractual obligations to supply material to energy from waste facilities. So this is not actually anything to do with deliverability and what can be achieved on the ground. It's if you've got a long-term tie-in with your EFW provider whereby you have to give them that material, those organisations, those authorities will be within that transitional arrangement. So it appears that they're completely applying flexibility where there's a contractual issue, but not thinking about the deliverability issue and the timescale. And this is where I think to some extent, if it is a very tight timescale that no one delivers on, what is the risk that we all face penalties? Potentially just being optimistic, you think, well, how can they actually penalise every waste disposal authority and waste collection authority in the country if no one can achieve this? So I don't want to say that that's the get-out clause, but we've still got the pressure to deliver by 2025, but hopefully they'll be a bit more realistic and listen to the feedback they've had so far and just give us a little bit more time to deliver on all this. Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Mike. Have we got anyone online? So I think we'll thank you for the update. That'll take us on to the next item, which is the Waste Partnership Health and Safety Group Officer Working Group briefing. David Steels.
Thank you, Chairman. I think I've got the best option of all the officers in terms of the reports that are being given, because while the world of strategic waste is turning on its head at the moment, this is a great opportunity to look towards sharing the work of our health and safety groups and our officer working groups. The report goes through a lot of the work that's been carried out in each of the partner areas and the work that's been carried out over the last 12 months. This is both these groups report through to the Strategic Officers Group, the officers of which are present in the room today. And might I say, the work of both these groups is both important and essential to delivering what our strategic outcomes would like to be. So it's a report for noting, and I would ask that all the partners look towards supporting the work of these groups and the officers that attend them.
Thank you, David. Any comments from anyone? No. I just pick up on one bit, because the persistent organic pollutants, I know some of the counties sort of bordering us have had problems with sofas and stuff like that, but I presume it's all been fine, or have you got to do certain things to pick them up nowadays, or?
I think I could vouch for my colleagues by saying that that's been a very, very big and important work stream, but I'd like to think that, yes, we do have a handle on that, and it's certainly the feedback that we've got from the Environment Agency is very supportive of the work in Lincolnshire.
Thank you. So that, I think that was just for noting, wasn't it, and supporting. The next one is the performance measure update. Matthew?
Thank you, Chairman. I won't go through entirely the report as written, but I do have a presentation with some of the charts on it that I'm going to be referring to. Before I move on to the specific numbers, I've highlighted in the report some headlines for what's happening this year. We're working in an ever-changing landscape, as we know, and we've already talked about a number of the things that are coming over the hill in terms of new policies, but there have been several changes already this year. The headlines really being we've had a lot less green waste this year than we have in previous years. It looks like the record-breaking summer of 2022, the high temperatures reduced garden growth and meant that we actually received as a partnership around 8,000 tonnes less green waste last year than we had in the previous summer. That has had an impact on our performance figures, and I'll go into that in a few minutes. We've also seen considerably cleaner recyclables thanks to our twin stream rollout and to the public engagement that we've been doing. And thirdly, we seem to be entering a new normal where post-COVID public behaviours, where they are when they need to throw things away, what they put where, what they present to us, does seem to be different to what it's been in the past. The balance between curbside and household waste sites, the balance of how much non-recyclable waste there is, does seem to be changing, and we're having to look at the impacts of this going forwards. But I'll go in now to the data and the actual results. This chart shows the overall performance against the waste hierarchy performance indicators that we have. On the face of it, there's good news and there's bad news looking at these. The good news being the bars down the bottom, the pink bars have reduced. That's the kilograms per household of waste for the year. The forecast for this year, based on data we've had on the year to date, is that we will have considerably less waste per household than we have had in previous years, and a lot less than our 1,000 kilogram target that we set ourselves a few years ago. That is partly this year down to that missing 8,000 tonnes of green waste, but we are also seeing a reduction in the non-recyclable waste that's being presented to us, whether that's in residual waste collections or as contamination of mixed recyclables. What seems to be going badly at the moment is the recycling rate, but I would say I would temper that by saying that the reduction in green waste that we've seen this year has resulted in a fall of around 1.5% in our recycling rate, and which was entirely beyond our control, and which actually is good news. Less waste is the priority of the waste hierarchy. If we can have less waste, that's much better than having more waste to recycle. That has reduced our recycling rate by 1.5%, but you'll note that our recycling rate has actually only fallen by 1%, which does indicate that our recycling rate would be higher this year had we had the same green waste this year as we had last year. We are moving in the right direction, other than that missing green waste, which, as I say, does skew the figures. Just to emphasise that, I would move on to the next slide, please. You can see here, this is the kilograms per household of green waste presented to us for composting. And not only is this year's figure lower than last year, it's the lowest year we've seen in a number of years, and that was down to that long hot summer. And that at the top you can see the yellow line indicates how much that contributed to our overall recycling rate, and 1.6% less is quite a considerable chunk taken out of that recycling rate performance. And the next one, please. This is what's happening with our curbside dry recycling. You can see, looking at the bars, the purple down the bottom, which is growing, is separate paper and card. On top of that is the target recyclables in mixed recyclables, which when you add that to the separate paper and card is about the same quantity of recyclables that we're collecting. The really good and important news on this chart is the red bar on the top. That's how much non-recyclable material was being collected in with those recycling collections, and that has fallen markedly. I was expecting, in seeing that, to see that waste moving through the Right Thing, Right Bin campaign, moving to residual waste collections, but actually, on the whole, it seems to be going. We seem to be actually having less non-recyclable material presented to us overall. Just moving on to the next one, please. This shows overall a breakdown of what happens with those kilograms per household where we've had less waste overall, and it does demonstrate, the main thing I wanted to talk about on this one is down the bottom of the bars at the bottom, the red bar at the bottom, which is landfill, which is very small, and the energy from waste, the yellow bar. These are, between them, considerably less than we had last year. We're seeing a fall in non-recyclable waste being presented to us overall as a partnership. I say a fall, although that's compared to last year. What we're actually seeing, I think, is a return to pre-COVID levels, having seen an increase during the period of the pandemic. But this is good news that is falling, and that, along with the fall in green waste, which is the green bar at the top, has meant that we've received less waste per household than we have for a number of years. The next one, please. So those were the performance indicators relating to the waste hierarchy. This one is our performance indicator relating to contamination levels in mixed dry recyclables. So this combines, in twin stream areas, this combines separate paper and card with the mixed dry recyclables, but this is overall for the whole partnership. The forecast for this year, you can see this is really excellent news. The blue line shows it as a percentage, but I would prefer really to look at the purple bars, which are, again, kilograms per household per year. We're down from a high level of over 60 kilograms per household per year of non-recyclables being presented in recycling bins. We're down to under 40 now through the largely through twin stream collections and through the accompanying Right Thing, Right Bin campaign. There have been improvements also in non-twin stream areas, but the really dramatic improvements have been with the introduction of twin stream. At this point, I've, in discussion with the strategic officers the other day, actually introduced some new charts. So could we move on to the next one, please? This one, I know it's a bit busy. I've got a simplified version of it in just a moment. But hopefully what you can see from this chart, which shows quarter by quarter how much non-recyclable waste there was just in mixed dry recycling, you can see over at the far right where, which is the most recent quarter we've got data for, that was just October to December last year. The 4 coloured lines at the bottom, each one of those is one of the districts that has rolled in twin stream collections. The 3 coloured lines at the top are those who've yet to roll in twin stream collections. And to me, this shows quite clearly that the quantity of non-recyclable material being collected in recycling collections by those districts doing twin stream collections is considerably lower than those that are operating a fully mixed recyclable collection at the moment. And in some ways that's highlighted even more by the final chart I'd like to show, which is actually exactly the same chart but with some of the noise taken out of information where things have basically stayed very similar. What you can see, and I've put a purple star on each one of the lines, these are the 4 districts that have rolled out twin stream collections, and the purple star shows basically when the publicity started to move towards the twin stream collections. You can see each one has in turn taken a dip in the kilograms of non-recyclables in those recycling collections. This is, as I say, just the mixed recycling. The paper and card actually is so clean that when I did a version of this chart with the paper and card contamination in as well, it hardly bumped them up at all. It was minimal compared to these quantities. But as I say, you can see that Boston, when it rolled out, the figures started going down. When North Kesteven rolled out, similarly, and moving right across the board. East Lindsey have seen a fall, although this was from a lower level than the others, and we're still in early days at the moment, and we may even see a further fall into next quarter. But this is kind of emphasising the good news about what the partnership are doing in moving to twin stream collections. So having covered the waste hierarchy indicators and the contamination indicators, I just wanted to move on to the other 2 themes that we had. I don't have slides for these other 2, but I've got my own notes. We've also talked in the past about carbon management, trying to reduce our carbon footprint. The work to actually measure the numbers for our carbon footprint is very complicated. Having been involved in some of it in the past, it's difficult to work out what to include, what to exclude. It had been somewhat mothballed during the pandemic while we were focused on other pieces of work, but I am back now into meetings. I've got a meeting next week with the County Council sustainability team. We'll be looking at how we're going to measure our carbon footprint again. So that work is kicking off again to get some real figures, but what I can say is that we are, through the twin stream rollout again, we are going to see some significant carbon benefits, and we're already seeing those, both in terms of reduced mileage. The paper and card is now being recycled much more locally in Norfolk rather than travelling large distances. We're seeing closed loop recycling, where rather than poor quality paper from mixed recycling being recycled into low quality products, we're seeing it being recycled into much better quality products, and therefore the paper and card can go around the loop of recycling many more times. And we're also seeing less contamination, as I've already said, which means that the process that sorts the material, which is quite a carbon intensive process with a lot of machinery going on, less material that is ending up as waste at the end of that, less material is going through that process, and that's reducing the carbon footprint of that as well. The partnership are also looking at, as was already mentioned, alternative fuels for vehicles to reduce our carbon footprint. There are various other good things going on, and things like food waste collections we hope will have an impact on carbon, and we shall certainly be trying to do that in such a way that it does reduce our carbon footprint for that waste. The final topic is a bit of an outlier in that we have previously discussed customer friendliness. The feeling I've had from previous discussions is that whilst we make every effort as each partner to engage with the public, a lot of the twin stream rollout is involved in engaging with the public. We all try to provide our customer friendly services. The feeling I've had previously is that there's a view that it's a difficult thing to measure how customer friendly we're being or how satisfied customers are, and that there's less of an appetite to actually have certainly an LWP-wide survey of customer satisfaction with services. But I stand to be corrected on that if anyone feels we should be moving in that direction. But that's where we stand on that final topic. And that's my summary, which I would commend to the partnership.
Thank you, Matthew. Councillor Head.
Thank you for that, Matthew. Some really, really interesting figures. I've got one question for you, and this is something that bugs me a little bit in terms of our the amount that we recycle. Should green waste actually be included in that? Because if everybody concreted over their gardens and put AstroTurf down, and we got no green waste whatsoever, it would show a considerable dip in our recycling rates, when in actual fact we know that from Twin Stream and the clean-up of the MDR, our recycling rates are actually going up. So, and again, if you've got a large metropolitan area, they don't have a huge amount of green waste that goes in. So to me, this is something, yes, it's good that we collect it, but I don't think it's something that should actually be in the figures, because if there's a wet year, recycling rates go up, when in actual fact they don't really. That should maybe taken out of it. And the other thing, in terms of any customer surveys that we may or may not do, if we were going to do customer surveys as to how people are viewing our waste collection services, to get anything meaningful out of that, I think it should be a unified set of questions that go out across the partnership, rather than we all make our own up. If you've got a unified set of questions, then you get a gauge then of what people think about Twin Stream in Boston, in West Lindsey, East Lindsey, whatever, rather than, you know, it's the same set of questions that go out, and then we get something meaningful come back from it.
Thank you, Councillor Head. Yes, in terms of green waste, it's beyond our control to a certain extent, because the national measures do include the composting of green waste, but I absolutely agree that it does go up and down. It's been the bane of my life for the whole time I've been working, doing these stats, that green waste goes up and down depending on the weather. And the number of times I've explained in meetings that our recycling rate over the winter is worse than in the summer, because people aren't doing gardening, we're not getting green waste compost. Yes, it does make life difficult. I think whether it should be included or not is a good question. I don't really have a personal opinion, other than the fact that it does make life complicated. But it's there in the national figures, and I think we need to. We amended our method of calculating our recycling rate to try to mirror the national method, and I think we need to try to stick to that as best we can. But that does highlight one of my bugbears with using recycling rate as an indicator at all, and what's happened to us this year really indicates that it doesn't truly reflect the waste hierarchy to say that you're trying to increase something that's in the middle of the hierarchy. And actually, if we could not collect anything for recycling, if that was all we were doing was stopping those recycling collections, but ended up still have the same quantity of residual waste, our recycling rate would be 0, but we'd be much better off, because we'd have a lot less waste. And it is difficult, and it does emphasise why I think we as strategic officers will be looking at whether there's a better way to measure what we're doing. And I think one of the things coming out of national government at the moment is looking at quantity of residual waste as being a key indicator, because then if you take it out by recycling it, or you take it out by minimising it, you're reducing that same figure. And I think that maybe is the way to go looking forwards, and there are national targets coming through for that. In terms of surveys, I think as officers we need to steer really from partners. If partners would like that sort of thing, then we can look to develop that as officers.
Thank you, Matthew. Councillor Wright.
Thanks, Chairman. Two different subject matters, please, Matthew. One, back to the green waste and the missing 8,000 tonnes. Was that on a baseline from the year before? And because have you looked at what the take-up was for green waste across all the collection authorities for that year, to see whether it should have actually increased if it wasn't for the dry weather? So that will also tell us whether people are potentially home composting as well, or getting rid of it through other means. We should also put into there. And the other subject matter is, I think Roger will remember this, years ago we had a nice gentleman called Sean, didn't we, that with the energy from waste plant had to come to us with regards to increasing the capacity within the variance, because there was more going into the energy from waste plant than was originally planned. Now that residual waste is going down, which is good news, but what impact will that have on the energy from waste plant? From what stage will it go down to levels? I know we take commercial waste as well, but what's the point levels going down? Will that affect the operational requirements of the energy from waste plant?
It's something that FCC are aware of. We've been in discussions with the operator for some time. It does create a gap, which they're confident they can cope with the difference in CV values by the various changes. It's not just the food waste, it's a whole DRS and EPR, which is coming into play, which ironically could help to balance this out with losing food waste. What it does do, it gives us the ability to sell that capacity to the commercial outlets. We're discussing that at the moment as to where we are contractually, because it does have a bearing on this whole transitional arrangement situation. So if we can prove that contractually we are obliged to give them that material, then we could be allowed that extra 15-year gap to kind of factor all this in and have this implemented. But at the moment, I'm still waiting for feedback from our Chief Commercial Officer to see what the contractual position is. But in terms of the operation of the facility, any gap that we create by taking out food waste could be substituted with commercial waste, and it shouldn't operationally affect the facility. Okay.
Thank you. I'll just come back before you go, because you said food waste, but I was talking about all residual, because we're showing residual reducing, aren't we? So that's not just food waste, that's the overall residual position declining, which is great for us as a society, but it will have that big impact, won't it?
Potentially, yes. I think contractually, funnily enough, I was just reading an email from the lead who's giving me this judgment on the contractual situation, so I could update, which unfortunately I won't be able to, because as most legal emails are, it goes into about six pages. But I think you're right in that reducing the overall residual material that we have going through could theoretically have an impact on the operation of the EFW, but there is a projection on property growth which could offset some of that. So we don't know, and there's so many different factors at play at the moment. It is very much a moving feast, but I think the whole growth in population is going to be a big issue for us, because otherwise we could have been in a position where we don't have enough capacity. So this could actually be doing us a favour in terms of EFW operation. Okay.
Thank you. Councillor Brearley?
Hang on, I haven't answered the green waste.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you for an excellent report. It was very, very clearly set out, and the charts are always very, very helpful. As they say, a picture is worth 1,000 words. I understand the suggestion to do a survey of residents, and I think I would support that. I think there is another thing that we can do which might be even more beneficial, and this is probably a given anyway, and that is to really just to do communications around thanking people for their support, because we are here this afternoon as a Lincolnshire Waste Partnership, but actually the partnership is very much between what we do and residents, because it depends on the goodwill and dedication of residents to putting the right thing in the right bin as to whether it's successful or not. So certainly in West Lindsey, and I would imagine that this is copied throughout the piece, but I think there's real value in thanking people for their participation in the recycling regime, and that is the best way to encourage them to engage even more. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Burley. Did you want to pick up on any of that before I go on? And maybe actually just before, do you want to pick up on Councillor Wright's last question as well?
I'll just pick up on Councillor Bailey's point around the communications. Just as part of the work that we do on an ongoing basis, not just in the areas that have rolled in, but in terms of all of the communications that we're putting out around improvements that are happening, we are tailoring those in a very positive way. So it's always around, we thank you for your help, this is the good news story, but also thank you very much for putting the right thing in the right bin, thank you very much for, and certainly as part of the LWP comms leads that are meeting regularly, we are looking at it as a suggestion from the SOWG about how we do a good news story just at the moment around the improvements that are happening in terms of the whole of Lincolnshire, both off the back of the twin stream, but just in general in terms of the reduced kilograms per household. So we'll pick that up and build on Councillor Bailey's points in that.
Excellent, thank you.
And to come in on that as well, I would say absolutely we do need to be thanking the people of Lincolnshire for what they do in response to the work that we do, because if people decided they were going to put all of their waste, recyclable or not, into their residual waste bin, then we would have a zero recycling rate. So we do really appreciate what the public do, and I do always try and make sure in writing our annual review that we are thanking the public. But yes, we'll continue to do that. Coming back to Councillor Wright's point about green waste, it ties in with what Councillor Head was saying about green waste, and I think it's looking at the figures, this is the lowest quantity of green waste we've had for several years. Unfortunately, I'm not able to break it down in terms of how much is home composted, but again, that highlights the vagaries of the using recycling rate and trying to chase quantities. That actually, in some ways, my dream scenario would be if all our residents put all of their green waste into home composters, used it in a local circular economy on their own gardens. That would be marvellous. We wouldn't have to send trucks out to collect all that green waste. We wouldn't have to pay money to composters to compost it for us. It would just be being done and would be fed back into people's own backyards. Unfortunately, that's not possible for everyone. And it looks likely that will be, we will be required to do that as part of the consistency arrangements to make sure every household does get a curbside green waste collection. We'll see how that goes going forwards. Most of our householders already do, but the quantity does go up and down, and it is largely beyond our control how much gardening people do and how much waste it results in, and therefore the impact on our recycling rate. Looking at the last few years, it's varied between about 19% and about 21% it's contributed, which clearly is a difference of about 2% in what we end up with. There was a recycling rate that we can't do a lot about, and any home composting that people do actually takes away from our recycling rate, even though it is a better thing. And I think that's something we need to look to try to do in how we're measuring things, but I'm not quite sure how we can do that in terms of home composting. Although I would say, on a personal note, in the past, as a partnership, we've had initiatives where we've supported home composting. It might be worth considering whether we want to do that again or do that more strongly now. But as I say, that might affect our recycling rate.
I would just say we need to consider which is the lesser evil, don't we? If we're chasing a rate, or the fact is if it's home costing, because we used to do reduced cost composting bins, didn't we? The fact is that you're reducing your carbon miles, aren't you? Because if the vehicles aren't having to go out to as many places. So I think at some stage there has to be a consideration on that, see where the level of balance is.
Thank you. Councillor Gamble-Jones.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. The green waste one is one where councils have shot themselves in the foot. They chased it simply because it added to their weights, and it was a mistake. Ultimately, they should have separated it out, and it should have stayed separated out so it doesn't cause this distortion. And if if DEFRA does decide to introduce it as a requirement, it will probably be one of the most inequitable and unfair requirements, given the number of flat dwellers and people who simply do not have and do not wish to have a garden, to be contributing through their taxation for those who are then receiving an unfair a service and enjoying that free service. I know we enjoy lots of other free services, but people have got used to that. But suddenly have that imposed on them, that them next door with a nice big garden are now having a garden waste collection service, particularly in those areas that were paying for it and now no longer paying for it, and they've got 2 bins, maybe, and suddenly it's on my council tax as well. And I think they really ought to think carefully about that. And I see no reason why it couldn't be separated out. It's got to be added back in, as you say. It's part of the national figures, but it is a distortion. And as you say, this year, we've got 8,000 tonnes gone adrift because in this year's figures, because of a very hot summer. And it's and you keep having to explain, I'm sorry, we had a really good summer. It just seems like a nonsense. But that's just my 2 pennies worth. We should say, right, that's because of this, but your actual core figures are this. It's something we can't control. On the overall recycling side of things, I think the message on the comms, the survey side, if it can be budgeted for, and it's of value, so it's all about the questions, obviously. It's very much about the comms, isn't it? Just like companies do. They budget for communications on the understanding that they're going to get a return. And I think that's probably the analysis that needs to be made. What will be the return on what you're going to communicate? And a survey ultimately will be about communication, because we want something back from it. And what will that survey actually return of value to the partnership, and ultimately for the most part, to the disposal authority, because you are the guys who are taking the biggest hit on managing this waste once it arrives on your doorstep, and then feeding back that information to us as collection authorities about how best we can possibly do the job, and do that and feed it back to you, particularly in all of the things that are coming downstream. So yes, see how cleverly those questions can be put to the residents to understand their thinking, if that's what you're going to get, and that information they give us about how best we can deliver the service at our end, and how best it works for you when you come to dispose of it. So yeah, it'll be an expensive exercise. Make it worthwhile.
Thank you, Roger. Any other questions? Or did you want to pick anything up out of that? No. So that's noted. And the next one is the forward plan to agree future meeting dates. Now, I don't know if anyone's got any ideas. Charlotte?
Yes, I believe future meeting dates are being looked at to see how they can potentially not coincide with other meetings, so we'll be able to put forward the dates that we proposed for that for the future LWP. But as you say, what we're looking for is kind of what would you like through the Strategic Officer Working Group and all the way down, what kind of actions have you got, or pieces of work that you want us to bring forward. As Steve updated earlier, there'll be the Joint Municipal Waste Management Strategy coming back with the updates from today, the performance indicators, etc. We'll obviously keep coming back with any updates regarding the Environment Act and the implications of that. But if there was anything else that anybody wanted to put on the plan for us to start looking at, to come back with.
I think there's enough in the pipeline at the moment for you, coming from up on high in many ways for you guys to be chewing over.
Mark?
Yeah, I'm just thinking if we do get some clarity around the Environment Act in the next month, I mean, obviously probably wouldn't necessitate another meeting, but some kind of maybe just briefing document just might be quite useful.
Yeah, we can have a look at how best to disseminate any information and whether or not a discussion would be useful depending on what comes out. I think DEFRA are going to put a meeting for officers as well, so we probably should have a lot of information. Plus, depending on when it lands as well, could well land in PERDA. So we have to think about the implications of that and how we share information and get information back. And if we were to, because of the consultation that will come with it, in what name that will need to go out in, etc. So we'll look at that.
Thank you, Charlotte. So before I close the meeting, I'd just like to say thank you all for coming. Thank you all for your input. And for those members that are going to be knocking on doorsteps very shortly, I wish you luck and I hope to see you again at the next one.